The desert never judged. It only remembered, and that morning it remembered everything as the sun crawled over the red hills like a slow-burning wound, lighting up the ranch where Eli Mercer stood frozen beside the barn, dust clinging to his boots and guilt pressing heavier than the saddle on his shoulder, because the words still echoed in his ears, "Don't move your hand there. Don't take advantage," spoken in a trembling voice that belonged to Clara Hayes, the preacher's widowed daughter, a woman already broken by drought, debt, and a town that smelled weakness the way wolves smell blood. And Eli had sworn long ago he would never be like the men who used desperation as leverage, never be like his own father who'd lost the ranch gambling and his soul drinking. Yet here he was, close enough to ruin to feel its breath. Because Clara stood in his barn not as a guest but as a debtor, her family land weeks from foreclosure, her hands shaking as she clutched her coat while Sheriff Doyle and the bank circled like vultures promising mercy they'd never give. And when she came to Eli, it wasn't for charity. It was for work, for time, for dignity. But the town whispered anyway. And the whispers followed him as he offered her shelter in the old foreman's house, as he paid her fair wages when others would have paid her nothing, as he defended her in the saloon when men laughed and said widows pay in other ways, and every good deed twisted into suspicion until even kindness looked like a sin. And that night, when a storm tore through the valley and Clara came running to the main house soaked and shaking after a shadow moved near her door. Fear made her words sharp and desperate. Fear that any man offering help always expected something back. Fear born from stories she never told but carried in her eyes. And when she flinched at his movement and whispered those words, "Don't take advantage," something inside, Eli broke clean in two because he realized the unthinkable truth. The town had already decided who he was, and Clara had been taught by cruelty to expect the worst. And the easy path would have been to step back, to let the bank take her land, to let the sheriff handle it, to wash his hands and protect his reputation. But that was not the unthinkable thing he did. No, the unthinkable thing came at dawn, when Eli rode straight into town, tied his horse in front of the bank, and walked inside with the calm of a man who had already decided what he was willing to lose. And in front of the banker, the sheriff, and half the town, he laid down the deed to his own ranch, not as collateral but as guarantee, saying Clara's debt would be paid in full by sundown, or they could take everything he owned, because advantage was not taken in the dark, but challenged in the open, and the room went silent as death. Because no one sacrificed power for someone with none. Not in this town, not ever. And when Sheriff Doyle sneered and asked what he got in return, Eli's voice didn't shake. When he said, "I get to sleep at night," and that was the moment the town realized the unthinkable thing was not what men did to women, but what a man was willing to do to protect one. And as Clara stood in the doorway watching, her last hope gamble his entire life on her worth, the desert wind carried a new question. Through Dry Creek, what kind of man gives up everything when he could have taken advantage instead? And if this story has hooked you so far, if you feel the weight of choices and the fire of justice, subscribe to this channel now, because stories like this remind us what real strength looks like. The fallout came fast, because when a man defies the rules of cruelty, the system moves to crush him, and by noon rumors spread that Eli Mercer had gone soft, that he'd lost his mind, that a woman had weakened him. And Clara heard every word as she stood alone on her porch gripping the rail, knowing her survival had just become the excuse men would use to destroy him. And when the bank stalled and Sheriff Doyle delayed, claiming paperwork errors while quietly giving raiders permission to test, Eli's resolve, the desert answered with violence. Fences cut, cattle scattered, shots fired in the night meant to scare, not kill, because fear was cheaper than bullets. And Eli understood then that the unthinkable act of sacrifice had invited an unthinkable response. So he did the only thing left. He went public, calling the town together in the churchyard where Clara's father once preached mercy, and he told them everything, not with anger but with clarity, exposing how debt was weaponized, how widows were cornered, how help always came with invisible strings. And as Clara stepped forward and spoke, not begging, not crying, but standing tall and telling her truth, the silence changed, because shame hates daylight, and the people who had whispered now had to look at themselves. And when Sheriff Doyle tried to shut it down, Eli did the final unthinkable thing, revealing documents proving Doyle and the banker had been skimming land through false foreclosures for years, evidence he'd gathered quietly while everyone underestimated a rancher who minded his own business, and the arrest that followed felt less like justice and more like release, as if the town itself exhaled for the first time in decades. And weeks later, when the bank honored the deal and Clara's land was safe, Eli's ranch still stood because integrity had turned enemies into witnesses. And on a quiet evening, as the sun sank red and gold over the hills, Clara stood beside him not as a debtor, but as an equal. And she said softly that the day she begged him not to take advantage was the day she learned. Some men refuse power even when it's offered. And Eli answered that the unthinkable choice is usually the right one. It just costs more, and as the desert settled into peace, the story didn't end with romance or reward, but with something stronger, respect, earned and shared. And if this story moved you, if you believe strength is proven by restraint and courage by sacrifice, subscribe to the channel, because every story we tell here is about standing up when it's easier to step back, and choosing humanity when the world expects cruelty. Time did not heal Dry Creek overnight because towns built on fear don't learn trust quickly, and even after the arrests and the cleared debts, people still watched Eli Mercer the way men watch a fuse they once tried to light, unsure whether it would burn them or save them. And Clara felt that weight every morning when she stepped outside her restored homestead, knowing her safety had come at the cost of a man who had risked everything. And though the land was hers again, peace felt fragile, like glass set gently on a rough table, because power never disappears. It only waits for new hands. And those hands arrived sooner than anyone expected, when a cattle syndicate from the South sent riders to buy out struggling ranchers, offering fast money and quiet threats. And when Eli refused, fences burned again, not from greed this time, but revenge. Because a man who exposes corruption becomes a symbol, and symbols are dangerous. And on the night shots rang out near the creek, Eli stood in the open instead of hiding, hands visible, refusing to play the game of fear. And Clara realized then the unthinkable choice he made wasn't a moment, it was a way of living. And when the syndicate leader confronted him, mocking his restraint, sneering that mercy was weakness, Eli answered with the truth the West hated most. That strength was choosing not to become what you hate even when it would be easier. And the confrontation turned when townsfolk stepped forward, men and women who once whispered, now standing shoulder to shoulder, because integrity is contagious once someone dares to show it first. And the riders left without bloodshed, not because they were afraid of guns, but because they were afraid of unity. And weeks later, Dry Creek changed quietly. No speeches, no monuments, just fair deals, open doors, and a new understanding that desperation was no longer currency. And on a quiet evening, as the desert sky burned orange and purple, Clara and Eli stood watching the horizon, not bound by debt or expectation, but by mutual respect earned through fire. And Clara said the words she'd never thought. She'd say that the moment she warned him not to take advantage was the moment she learned some men redefine power by refusing it. And Eli replied that the unthinkable choice costs everything once, but pays forever. And as the wind moved across the land like a promise, this story became more than a tale of a rancher and a woman. It became a reminder that real heroes don't take what they can, they protect what they should. And if this story made you feel something real, if you believe courage still matters and integrity still has a place in this world, subscribe to this channel now, because every story here is a stand against cruelty, a voice for justice, and a reminder that the unthinkable choice is often the one that changes everything.